Hello and welcome to Them's Writing Words, a podcast discussing selected fanfictions from the world of pastel horse literature. My name is Scribbler, and I will be your moderator today. Joining me for this discussion, we have Cygnus.
Greetings.
Goombasa.
It feels good to be out of the rain.
Illya Leonov.
Hello, everyone.
Luna Farrow.
Good morning, good evening, whatever time of day it is for you.
Midori.
Hullabaloo and howdy do.
And Thornquill.
Hello, everyone.
Today we're looking at Thornquill's pick for our fanfic, Blue Skies Bring Tears by A Hoof-ful of Dust. The synopsis reads, Thornquill?
Fiddlesticks walks the dead earth of the Badlands and plays her song to the listening shadows.
The story was published between... fucking hell, what the fuck is... How was this published between the 6th of July 2014 and 15th of October 2012?
I don't think that's correct.
No, I don't think that's correct. It's a time-traveling story. Okay. Did I forget to change the doc, or what's going on?
No, it was definitely published 6th July 2014.
Yes, and it's only got the one chapter, so...
Yeah, exactly. I think I must have been sleep-deprived when I did this last week. I did this last week, that was it. When we were going to record last week, I half did the doc, and then thought, oh, I don't have to finish it because we're not doing it till next week, and then forgot to finish the doc. My bad. The story was published on 6th of July 2014 and clocks in at 1,498 words. Also, Scribbler can't do organisation. Right, so, first off, as ever, we're going to be in the spoiler-free territory. This is a very, very short fix, so if you want to go ahead and read it and then come back, it won't take you long. We'll tell you when spoilers kick in. So first off then, tags. Do we believe that they are accurate? I'm going to check and make sure I haven't fucked up the doc again. They are romance and sad. So, Thornquill, as fic picker, do you think that these tags are accurate?
Fairly. Romance is one that would draw a caveat, as I wouldn't say that this is so much a romance story as the tag is there to indicate that there is romance in it. I think if this had been me... Shoot, I had the one that I thought I would add and then I lost it. Never mind. I feel like this needs another tag, but I've forgotten which one it is.
Hence the other tag.
No, that's just for character.
Shoot. Maybe we do need an other for genre. Genre not appearing in this story.
Wow.
Sorry.
I've always been rather sad that there hasn't been something more like a philosophical or introspective tag, because that would certainly apply here.
I would agree with you on that.
Slice of life. That's it.
I don't know if Slice of Life quite fits this, though. Like,
No.
You don't think
Well,
so?
Let Thorny
It's
say
not
his
a
piece.
slice of my life.
Before we
It
all
is a
jump
slice
on
of
him.
a life, though.
Before
I'll agree
we
with
all
that.
jump on him, let Thorny make his
But-
point.
But we're not certain there's any life here. It might be all metaphor, you think?
We are way too early into the review for that level of depth, Illya. No,
Well,
I mean...
put a pin in that. Put a pin in that. The fic is only just over 1,000 words. Pin in that one.
So, I mean, normally Slice of Life tends to be very non-heavy and just kind of bright fiction, but I don't think that's necessary for it to be Slice of Life. This is almost, I'm sorry, Sickness. I'm so sorry.
Stop it right there.
But okay, so the Salary Mare's Infinitude, that is not a happy story by our very brilliant
Link in the
Shadow
description.
Cygnus. And I would qualify it. I mean, he basically wrote it to be anti-slice of life in the sense that the genre is usually taken. I see this one in a similar vein.
I
Okay.
would tend to agree with that.
Okay, so
just-
you can go next, Cygnus, about whether or not you agree with the tags, romance and sad, and potentially slice of life.
Yeah, I do believe that both romance and sad do apply. Sad, I have always hated as a tag because the story shouldn't be telling you how you should feel about it before the story starts. Again, if there were an introspective tag, I'd put that in place of sad, but there isn't, and that's a failing of the site, not the author. With regards to the slice of life one, yes, and not just because I've written a story in a similar vein. This is definitely a slice of a life. Her life, the character's life, and that's, I would argue, undeniable. And unfortunately, we do have kind of a slanted view of what slice of life means. And again, that's more a failing of internet psychology than necessarily the author. But I do agree. I wish there were more provision for use of the term in that way.
Do you agree that it is a sad fic?
No, because I liked it. And
Oh!
yeah, sorry, SADFIC as a moniker tends to be something that I avoid because that, to me, tends to apply melodrama, and I don't do melodrama.
I was going to say, you mean like Glurgy fucking designed to make you cry even if you hate it?
Dem feels stories! Fucking hate that term.
Perhaps it should be a tag for maudlin.
That's
Yeah.
a good word for it, thank you.
True.
Maudlin would be a good tag. Certainly better than feels.
I don't think sad is a necessarily bad tag if you're using it on a story that is genuinely sad and thoughtful and introspective like this one, though. Like, yes, you'll also wind up being stuck surrounded by fics that are like designed to make people cry at the expense of whatever the fuck. I'm not thinking clearly, but it's like, you know.
Or stories that are attempting to be sad, like The Cold Hand of Mercy and a bit hit or miss, but certainly have sad themes in them.
I will break a teacup over your head.
You hang on. You can't scare me.
5 minutes in, and we finally reached our threat of violence for the episode.
But I haven't told you all to fuck off, so this is still good.
Oh, I thought it was me. I thought you only told me to fuck off. Are you telling me that we don't have a special relationship anymore?
Okay, Cygnus, fuck off.
There we go.
Don't settle for that toss out. You have to earn a genuine fuck off.
You can fuck off an old Thorny.
See, now I just feel you're pandering to me.
Well, at the risk of promoting yet another one of us here, I think we've already mentioned Project HS, heteropaternal superfecundation.
Super
That
fuck off station.
Fuck you!
I had to.
Heteropaternal superfecundation was labeled as slice of life, which I think fits because it was a drama story oriented around the ordinary goings-on of ponies who aren't going on fucking adventures.
I did?
You did.
Well, to
It
be
is
honest,
slice of
the
life.
argument could be made that Mrs. Kate really did go on a fucking adventure.
Stop.
Why?
Because narrator's not here, so I need to make these jokes.
Also, I
God
did
damn it.
not tag HS as slice of life.
Come on,
I'm
the
sorry.
last time I looked at it was slice of life.
Nope,
Slice of
never.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, that's too good.
I'm eating, okay?
I know, but that was just perfect for that story.
No, I tagged it drama, which, yeah, I think is more fitting than slice of life in the context of that story, but...
Romance, drama, sad. I'm looking at it right now, and all
I
three of
want-
those apply.
I want a tag now for Slut Wife, and I want it to only apply to stories about Mrs. Cake.
Yes!
Oh, I am so out.
Except if she's a cake and it's called Slice of Wife, that is going to open up a lot of grimdarks.
You're welcome, Internet.
Moving right along.
This is
Right,
work.
Why don't we continue with the discussion of the tags, shall we?
Exactly. Luna, do you believe that these tags are accurate?
I wasn't going to say that I'd like to add or remove any of them. I mean, I do think that romance, like Thorny said, is something that's kind of just there to sort of hint at what's really going on in the story before you read it, but is not necessarily what the story is about. I wish there were like a grief tag or something, because yeah, sad, but if you go, but like Sigma
Would
said, if you-
tragedy fit?
there's tragedy, but like a tragedy, I always like to think of tragedy as being a story that specifically adheres to the classical tragedy tropes, which this just definitely doesn't fit.
So you want tragedy to purely be Aristotle?
Basically,
Link in the description to explain Aristotelian tragedy, because I'm not going into that here.
short and sweet version, like a tragedy where a character like brings about their own demise or their own downfall.
The Sorrows of Young Werther.
I was thinking Romeo and Juliet.
Ah,
Well,
die
that too.
Leiden des jungen Werthers.
Yeah, Aristotelian tragedy is very interesting. I would argue that there are quite a lot of polyfics that probably fit that. This is not one of them.
No, definitely not.
So do you think that it fits the idea of it being a romance then?
Not really. Again, like Thorny said, I think that the romance tag is literally only there because there is a romance or a memory of a romance in it. but the story itself is about very different things.
Okay, so before we get into spoilers, Goombasa, do you believe the tags are accurate?
Not really, no. Romance is about as much a romance as The Raven is a romance, if you want to take it that way. Because in The Raven, you have the narrator pining for a lost love as well. That's about on the same level as is when it comes to romance. And Sad, I suppose, is the best one that they could have chosen for the tone of this story, because I don't find it sad. I find it very melancholic, but I don't think that it would have fit drama or tragedy. So given that it only has a few tags to choose, I do think that Sad was the best choice it could have made, but not necessarily the most accurate.
Okay. Illya, what do you think?
Well, I think it was vaguely romantic and vaguely sad. As you said, it had about as much romance as The Raven, but there was a hint of a romance in it. So with the dearth of tags available for this fix, I suppose romance fits. I didn't find it sad. It didn't move me in a sad way. But then it was probably attempting to, so perhaps sad was appropriate. I think perhaps more appropriate would be a tag, something like pensive. Think about this. I mean, that's about what I got.
There used to be an old tag in other fandoms, and it's on fanfiction.net, of angst. And it always surprised me that that is not a thing in ponydom. Angst fix. Because I think that might be the one you're looking for.
Because
Maybe.
that's the one that SADFIC occupies on this site.
Angst is it's slicing SADFIC down, though. Like, SADFIC just can have sad themes or sad ideas. Angstfic is very much about the internal and about one character musing over their own sadness.
It's a bittersweet candy bowl.
Well, and as someone with much less experience in fandoms than most here, and coming from a bit more from the outside, angst to me has a very judgmental connotation. Like, that's something you say about whiny teenagers who don't know what to do with their own emotions. So
You have just characterized all the fanfic authors who usually write angstfics, or at least when I was writing them.
That's the thing. So to tag your story, that would be automatically self-deprecating. I can't see why anyone would do that. So I can see why we don't
Hang
have
on,
that.
Mr. King of Self-Deprecation.
I beg your pardon.
Yes.
You've got to be a king of something.
Well, yeah, because Stigmas is the croissant king.
Well, it
Am I now?
It's stuck, I'm afraid.
In what universe?
In the universe of them's writing words, since, oh god, Thornquill was Croissant Boy, wasn't he? That makes you sound like a superhero duo, Croissant King and Croissant Boy. I want art of this.
Mother of God.
That might be your catchphrase as you leap from building to building. Midori, do you believe these tags are accurate?
I do not, but unfortunately for me, having very similar tastes and ideals to Goombasa causes me to basically, in this situation, what I'm trying to get at is that he surmised everything that I could think of as far as the tags go, and he surmised it in a far more articulate and well thought out manner than me, so I don't really have anything to add to this point.
So what you're saying is, he took your job!
He took me
Get there.
Okay, so we'll move on to a basic summary of the story. Now, considering that this is just over 1,000 words, the spoiler-free version of the story is gonna be interesting. Thorny, over to you.
Spoiler-free version of the story is that pony named Fiddlesticks, who is a background character that appeared in maybe one episode,
Two.
Apple Family
Two?
Reunion.
Cool.
She was the fiddle player.
Yeah. So this character travels into basically the wastelands of Equestria, which on the canon map are to the south near Appaloosa. And for reasons unknown, and she is taking her instrument there, and she is playing music to entities or creatures unknown until you get into the story. And basically the entire story is you learning about how she got into an absolute complete wasteland, why she chooses to be there, and what's waiting for her there.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know how much more to go into spoilers because literally after that...
I wasn't trying to push you into that. I managed to minimize the doc by accident and needed to stop pressing my push to talk. That was me just going, oh shit, right. Pause for dramatic effect. Well, the thing is, because it's a summary of the story, we can't really talk about the rest of it without going into spoilers. So if anybody would like to go and read the story and come back, we will wait the 5 minutes. Pause the video here. Right, there you go. Back with us. Spoilers from here on in. So this spoilery version, please, Thorny.
So once again, there's the character named Fiddlesticks, and she's headed into the wastelands. And when she arrives there at night, she takes out her fiddle and she starts composing a song that is all about her life, how she grew up in cabins and wilderness and remembers winter especially. And she set out and traveled, went to the big cities, met a poet there. They fell in love. You know, they had their bohemian romance. Her lover dies. He kills himself out of, well, actually, to be honest, angst and depression, and leaves her to carry on life on her own terms. And coming to this Shadowland, turns out that it is actually inhabited by the dead. And by playing this song and bringing her soul forth this way, she can actually conjure his shadow and be with him for a time, which she chooses to do, and eventually has to choose to leave as well, whether to continue living or to become a shadow herself. So there you go.
Oh, is that what you got out of it? I thought it was purely metaphorical.
Me too. I was like, the woods are lovely, dark and deep, etc., etc., etc.
Exactly.
I mean, that's kind of a thing that this being a ponyfic makes it a bit unique, because we're operating in a fantasy world where there can be ghosts or things like that. And so that's kind of a question that the reader is asked. Are these shadows actually coming alive and dancing around her to her song? Or is this all in her mind, or is it just poetry on the author's part? Having magic in this universe kind of skews that question.
God, I love ambiguity.
It's a beautiful thing, isn't it?
Yeah. That's not an ironic comment.
When it's used well, yes.
It's probably not helped a lot. It's probably not helped a lot by the fact that the author admitted to taking a smidge of inspiration from the first Dark Tower book by Stephen King.
A smidge.
See, I've got to say, I'm going to stand here and say that for all the listeners, I am in the camp of people who've not read the Dark Tower series. Also haven't seen the movie, though I'm led to believe it's not a good representation of the work.
I don't know any of it either.
I'm also in that camp,
Right.
actually.
Okay. Who here has read Dark Tower enough to be able to comment upon how much he's taken from it?
I've read the first 2 books and half of the third.
That's probably enough.
Yeah, so Midori, how well do you think this is? Well, does this borrow? Does this plagiarize? Is it merely influenced? What do you think?
It's merely influenced. It's because the first book in the Dark Tower series takes very heavily, it takes a lot of place in a wasteland, much like the setting of this story. And there is constantly this supernatural element happening through several segments of the book that generally increases more and more as the series goes on, because it's a very post-apocalyptic setting, and the main character, Roland the Gunslinger, who for the entirety of the first book is only known as the Gunslinger, is constantly chasing down this man who is supposedly like the devil incarnate or something like that. So with this setting being in a wasteland with shadows coming forth and everything, it's hard to tell if this is going on in Fiddlestick's head or like, well, given that it is a My Little Pony world and that it is inspired in part by the Dark Tower, these shadows are likely actually there in the story. But as Cygnus said, it is rather ambiguous.
Of course it's happening in your head, Fiddlesticks. Why should that mean that's not real?
Ah, good old Dumbledore. In the Captain America sense, I get that reference.
Well, there are two levels of metaphor I wanted to get into at some point. One was whether she actually went to the Badlands, and two, whether the things in the Badlands were actually there. I think those are 2 points to discover.
Well, we should probably have a look at the characterization, because it's the first point on our list, and also it does lend itself to the discussion we're already sort of having of, is Fiddlesticks really a character here, or, especially given the story's length and the potentially metaphorical nature of the story, is she just a cipher to get ideas across? So I'm going to give this to Thorny to begin with, because he's fic picker.
And I actually kind of want to defer, because I would like more explanation on what whomsoever wrote this point, I think it was you, Scribbler,
It was.
Means by whether she's a character or a cipher.
Well, I can only give you my personal interpretation of cipher. That I've always understood a character to be a creation who has layers. So a character is someone who has motivations, has thoughts, feelings that are unique to the character, whereas a cipher is just a body being manipulated and moved around a story. A lot of the truest sense of the word Mary Sue fics are ciphers, that they don't tend to have a lot of depth to them, and are just being manipulated around a story, and the characters cease to be characters around a Mary Sue. They become little shells just doing things that are recognizable as those characters, but out of character at the same time. The finale of Game of Thrones. Daenerys in the last couple of episodes. I'm not going to spoil it for you.
No.
Not going to spoil it for you, but I'm saying for anybody who does know what happens, I would say Daenerys goes from being a character to being a cipher in that last season. And that should probably give you an idea of what I mean by cipher.
Okay. Yeah, that's a really good way of looking at that. And to respond, I think I would say that she does... I can see how she would read as a cipher. I think she still reads as a character just because of the last lines of the story, where it's basically she's conjured the shadow that she wants to see. You know, she's kind of with her lover again in a way. And at the very end of the story, it says she would turn back when the sun rose, and she would walk back towards civilization and the light. But that would come later. For now, it was shadows she wanted. And that gives me the idea that this is a character who is making a choice to come to this place. She's making that choice because there's something she expects to get out of being there. Once she's done that, she is making a choice not to stay there, but to leave it behind her again. That to me reads as a character.
Goombasa, you have something to add?
I don't really know if I could call her a character, because what would really change, for example, if it were Octavia as the character in this story? I mean, in the show proper, obviously, Fiddlesticks has no character. She shows up once or twice. To my knowledge, she's never had any sort of speaking line, even a background line.
She's not. She's just a recolor of Octavia.
Yeah, and that's sort of what I'm getting at here. You could probably replace Fiddlesticks with any pony that was a musician or had the capability of playing an instrument. And I don't think much about this story would change, which to me says that she isn't really a character. She does seem more like, as Scribbler put it, a cipher.
I think I will disagree that she can be swapped out, because we're getting into the grounds of whether a character follows a canon characterization versus whether they're a completely original made-up character. And at this point especially, neither Fiddlesticks nor Octavia have a canon personality so much, but Octavia very much had a fanon personality, and there were a lot of expectations on what her life was like and the kind of life she lived up to the point where she appears in the show. Now, you can change that in a fan fiction, of course. You can write Octavia's backstory to be whatever you want it to be.
She's a vampire.
God, not that.
No,
again.
no.
Jesus Christ.
She's a werewolf. We've
True.
been over this.
She can be a werepire. The best of both worlds.
You can do it. Please don't.
That movie was reasonably terrible.
Also, the episode of The Real Ghostbusters where that happened.
Really?
Yeah, there is an episode of The Real Ghostbusters where they go to a village that's cut off from the rest of the world, that's being run by vampires who have imprisoned a bunch of werewolves. And at the end of the episode, the werewolves get free and they start fighting each other, and werewolves and vampires start biting each other. So they become werepires, and so they can't tell each other apart anymore, and it basically brings peace to the entire village. But the Ghostbusters still blow up the bridge to it so that they can't cross the running water and get back to the real world.
Okay.
Well, all right
See
then.
this now.
But yeah, at any rate, so obviously you could say that Octavia had this as her past, but it doesn't fit very well with her fanon interpretation. This character is someone who has a very rural background. She grew up in a cabin, had a wood-burning stove that brewed coffee and all that sort of thing, and she never went to any academies. She's a completely self-taught musician who never achieved any kind of commercial fame. Whereas Octavia is usually taken to be, brought up in a fairly wealthy background in a big city, went to academies, got into the orchestras and all that. And I think just by laying out those differences, I've also laid out my case for Fiddlesticks does have characteristics that define her as a person. She has this background that's laid out in the story. She's not just an empty shell.
I will just point out at this point, Goombasa once did a reading of, I think it's called Oh Fiddlesticks, a story where Octavia and Fiddlesticks are the same character. Goombasa, am I remembering this correctly?
Yes. I think it was just called Fiddlesticks, but yeah, that was a while ago, actually.
Like 2013-ish, wasn't it? One of your first stories, because I
Yeah.
remember listening to that on a dog walk and thoroughly enjoying it, because it managed to make the Octavia and Fiddlesticks are the same character really believable. So it could well be that Octavia did grow up in a place with a wood stove.
Well, and I'm thrilled that you brought that one up, because getting ready for this review, I was thinking, I remember one other story about Fiddlesticks, and it was where Octavia was pretending to be someone else. Good
Story.
I think
And
it's
there's a
the
damn
same
good reading.
one. But in that one, Octavia was pretending to be Fiddlesticks because she was embarrassed to be seen in a rural setting, wasn't it?
I think it was just she was being Fiddlesticks because she was trying to escape Vinyl, and she was going to visit her Apple. The Apple family was part of her family, and she was trying to make sure that Vinyl couldn't spot it was her. So she dressed up as a different pony just so that Vinyl would leave her alone.
I thought it was because she was afraid of either Vinyl or anyone else being like, "Oh, she's not in the right society. She's all these rural backwards ponies," or something like that. I don't know, Goombasa, you did the reading.
That was
Yeah.
a long time ago. But yes,
Oh,
I
yeah.
do believe it was specifically because she was avoiding Vinyl, and she was worried that Vinyl would let it slip that she was directly related to the Apple family or something like that. I really should go back and reread that story.
I remember it being
it's
good.
A good story. It is a good story, and that means that we're both right. But yeah, for those who I'll start that sentence again. For those who want a really good Fiddlesticks story, go and listen to Goombasa's reading. I'll put a link of it in the description. Carry on.
Well, at any
No,
rate,
carry on.
I think
Sorry,
all of this.
I've got a mod. I'm supposed to be telling who to talk.
But I think it all does kind of lay out the point, even where Octavia has to pretend to be Fiddlesticks. That means that Fiddlesticks is different enough from her that they can be told apart.
True. Right. Cygnus, you have something to say?
I do indeed. I would like to put it forward that I agree with Thorny on this point, and with regard to your question as a general rule, Scribbler, I want to toss this one back to you. Does every man or every mare character, if you will, immediately become a cipher in your eyes? Well,
In what sense? What do you mean? What context are we talking about here?
This very much reads, this story and many of the other ones on the site that have, for example, an other tag, read less as specific characters and more of the everyman. You know, just someone random off the street that something could happen to, that you are supposed to be looking through the eyes of, things of that nature. Do they inherently become less of a character to you if they are more of a general persona?
No. I think that if they're not characterized particularly densely, they become a cipher. That's, again, pretty personal opinion on this one, but that is my criteria for the difference between a character and a cipher, is the level of complexity in their characterization. And that's why I asked this question, because I genuinely didn't know which one it should be. Luna, I can see you tapping. Would you like to say something?
We can hear you. We can hear you.
We can hear you tapping.
Frantic. I have something to say. That was the equivalent of you waving your hand in class and going,
Oh my
"This looks like me." Go on then, Luna.
Went fucking JoJo on that poor key.
Midori, you can stop now.
Fucking okay. I was gonna add something to Cygnus's thing about the everymare. I don't think that she is an everymare either, because isn't an everymare supposed to be somebody that is, yes, you can pull them off the street and see through their eyes, but generally there's somebody that is generalized in such a way that nearly anyone can identify with them. But she specifically, through the lens of her memories of being in a relationship with somebody who was like her in a way that was, she hadn't experienced any other pony. My interpretation of that was that she is a character in the sense, like she may be less fleshed out. First of all, a story that this short probably can't give can't give as deep characterization to anybody as would meet the requirements that you're giving for being a character versus a cipher.
I'm going to refute that in a second with an example, just so you're aware.
Meh.
Oh my god, that's the best response. I take your intellectual agreement and I say, "Meh."
I do think that she was characterized enough to make her a character and not a tool, which, like, not merely a tool for the story to give a message, because of the way that she is characterized through her memories of somebody else, if that makes any sense.
No, it makes sense. Illya, what do you think? Is she a character or a cipher?
Well, I believe she's a character. And in the sense that if she's not a character, then her lover isn't a character, and no one's a character, and the whole thing is built on ciphers. I do believe, like Luna, that there was enough backstory established to make her a character. And she is a canon character, very slightly, but she still is one. What I want to discuss, and I don't know if it's in the notes or not, is whether or not her travel to the desert was real or not. I believe she is, but I don't know about that. And perhaps we want to talk about that later, and I'm not certain.
Yep, we will be, because Cygnus brought up a point about this, about whether the story was real or metaphorical. Just remembered I was going to refute Luna's point. Yeah. A short story that demonstrates characterization within a very short amount of words, The Cough. Every single one of the main 6 is deeply characterized in The Cough. Midori?
Well, I just wanted to finish the point on point number 3 that we were discussing.
Go ahead. I was about to ask you after Illya, so go ahead.
Sorry, something got caught in my throat.
Was it
That's
Little
where
Mint?
the frogs went.
Well, she is green like a frog.
Oh my god! Oh my god! Stop it! You're gonna break me. This can't be like the 3rd or 4th podcast in a row where I am just reduced to stupid amounts of laughing by the end and claiming that you killed me. We can't do this again, people. This
Very
cannot be a
well.
trend.
In any case,
Well, we have about half an hour left anyway, so...
Shit, we're at half an hour and we're on point 3.
I'll try to be brief. I find it, it's hard to say, but I feel like Fiddlesticks was the most appropriate character chosen to be represented in this story. The person that wrote the story, like I said, they took inspiration from the Dark Tower, so they wanted somebody that had a bit of a cowboy theme, for lack of a better way of putting it, and somebody that could play music so that there could be a bit of a melancholic rhapsody that they play at the end of this story and everything. The interpretation that I got of Fiddlesticks' character from this story is a very odd one. I don't know if it's correct, but what I got of her was that she lived a peaceful, simple, happy life with her family and whatnot before she went out into the world looking for something that she felt like she was missing. And when she found it, oddly enough, it was sorrow. It was depression. It was melancholy. And she found that through a stallion that she fell in love with who was experiencing these things. And she used that as inspiration for her music. But the joy of that she shared with him, even though it did make him happier, it didn't make him happy enough, and he eventually took his own life. And now she truly knows what it means to feel melancholy. And there was a very odd part of the story that got brought up where they would like play cards, and there was some sort of mention of I got the vibe of like a tarot reading where they should be wary of water, and they laughed about it together. But then the stallion drowns himself, and Fiddlesticks, I don't know if it's supposed to be symbolic, but she goes out into this wasteland devoid of water to pay respect to him and build a one-time only song out of the melancholy that she now feels in her life.
Okay.
So with that in mind, she does have a character here. I don't feel like she's a cipher. I honestly feel like no background pony would have been a better choice for this, but I don't know. I mean, I guess you could say that, like, oh, this character knows how to play music, like Applejack or something, and throw her into the shoes. But I think that, it's a bit more fitting to have this character that we don't know a lot about, so that we can see, like, a little bit of her story that she has that nobody else has.
Okay. So, quality of the writing. How is it in our estimation? Does anything stand out? So I'm going to start with Cygnus this time. Cygnus, what do you think of the quality of this writing?
Throwing me under the bus to start.
I'm literally just going through down the list because otherwise I'm losing track of who has and hasn't spoken.
Now, in terms of the writing, I had a little bit of trouble with it to start. It's not quite purple, but it's let's go with lavender for about the first paragraph or two, and then it really finds its footing more as it tries to get away from the Elliot and I suppose the king. But I think the writing was perfect and beautiful and coherent after about the third paragraph. The first couple kind of felt like the writer had just woken up from the dream that inspired this and was getting down all of the fluffy imagery to start. And while it served the fic to an extent, I'm not sure that it was something that should have necessarily survived multiple editing drafts.
I would tend to agree with that, if I am okay to interject. I was reading the first few paragraphs of this story, and what came to mind was this person literally just read this poem, and this poem is still in their mind, and everything they're writing is coming out through the lens of that poem. And there's also a tint of like mythological storytelling to it, like they rush very quickly through the establishment of the setting in such a way that I think the whole ponies don't go there, but this pony is done very effectively. But the rest of the lavender prose has a peculiar quality of being both an attempt at being poetic and an attempt at being mythic at the same time. Like, this is an ancient story that's been told with slight variation throughout the generations, etc., etc., etc. And now we're talking about this particular pony, and that's where it really gets off the ground.
I like that. I very much like that interpretation, and specifically the part about the cyclical nature of this. And that's to kind of tie it back to what I was asking about the Everymare Scribbler. I very much think that there is a place in the halls of the character side of things for people like this who are going through something that many others have, that many others will, but that still remains a personal journey. And I will say I do think the writing captured that very well. And thank you for bringing that up, Luna, because that was something I'd come up with but had forgotten to note down.
Okay, sorry, I was hitting the wrong button there. Goombasa, what do you think of the quality of the writing?
I was torn when I read it the first time, but when I went back to reread it again, I did find a much more appreciation for the way that it was written, because it has been mentioned that it has a bit of a mythic quality to it, especially in the beginning. And I'm a big fan of stories that pull that off very well. And the story in its entirety just feels like something that a storyteller would relate. Somebody who has a bit of a poetic lilt to the way that they talk. It just strikes me as the sort of thing that somebody would sit down and tell to a large group of people who were all sitting around a fire trying to get warm and just listening to something to take their minds off their own troubles. Especially the paragraph where it is described how the stallion drowned, what happened to him, I thought was particularly beautifully written. And I don't often take of the order that words are put into, but it really sort of struck me. Like, the phrase here, "and broken was her heart, but yet a part of her, the part that he had kindled with his distaste and distrust of the world, that part knew he would always fall and sink." That is, on its own, is a beautiful line, and it's encompassed in a beautiful paragraph. So while I did find myself somewhat bored by the story, I will say that I do think it is beautifully written.
Illya, what do you think?
I think, as Goombasa says, it bears reading twice. The first time through it, I was thinking it might be an adventure story, so I was looking for an adventure, and then I think that bothered me a little going into it, so I wasn't able to put myself into the story as well as I might have if I'd left my mind more open to interpretation. Upon reading it the second time, however, everything made a lot of sense, and I enjoyed the imagery. I think he wrote it pretty well. I don't think it was too purple to be so to the point where it would take you out of the story. I was very pleased with the author's use of eyes. As the stallion fell into the water, and she saw his eyes as he fell in, and his eyes as he went down. And then later on, at the very end, she sees the eyes of the black shadow stallion and pulls it all together in a nice, neat package. So, yes, I think certain aspects of it were written very well. I think it could have done with a bit more. It maybe dress it up to about 3,500 words, give us a bit more imagery. That might have bored some of the people a little bit more, but I would have enjoyed it, I think.
And not a mention of orbs in sight.
Fuck that noise. I've said it before. I'll say it again. I'll say it again in the future. Don't call eyes orbs. And I don't care what fanfic author you admire used it. It's shit. Don't
Did she do that?
do it.
Did the author do that?
No.
No.
Good,
This is a rant of an old podcast. I can't even remember which one now because I've said it so many times. I fucking hate it when people describe eyes as orbs, especially when they use weird food references for the eye color. Chocolate orbs as things. Fucking, that's not an eye. That's a sweetie that you eat.
I believe the rant came up in the Cold Hand of Mercy.
Was it? I
thought
don't
it was
I
the
don't remember.
Bonaventure or whatever,
The
the
fucking- the
first one
changeling one?
that I was on for. Yeah.
It's entirely possible I ranted about it in both because I hate it that much. It's my proper pet peeve. It is my horse with no name, Thorny.
God damn it.
Context, Thorny hates that song.
I really do.
Right, since Luna has already spoken, Midori, what do you think about the quality of the writing?
I think the quality is fine. It's very obvious that they took inspiration from a poem on top of the work of Stephen King, and they were very eloquent in how they presented everything that they wrote. But other than that, I don't really have a lot to add to the topic.
And Thorny?
This does exemplify how these things, to an extent, whether the spectrum of purple to simple does come down to taste for to an extent, because this writing to me is absolute perfection.
Strong words.
No, I'm dead serious. This to me reads about as perfectly as most things I have ever read, and I absolutely aspire to do things half as beautifully and as concisely as this anywhere at any time.
Wow.
Can we get a little graphic of a Thornquill seal of approval on this story then?
There we go. So those in the comments, can we please have someone draw a Thornquill seal
I'll poke
of
Panda about
approval?
it.
Yeah, I can talk. Ah,
Draw.
there we go.
Draw him with a hard on that. I can't tell you that.
Hang on. Did you say heart on or hard on?
Choose your poison.
Oh my god! Don't draw the
There's that
second one,
lovely
anybody!
ambiguity, Cygnus.
No!
And well earned.
That's just... oh my god.
But no, I'm absolutely in agreement, Thorny. Again, after about... By the time the third paragraph starts, I'm with you on the reasonable perfection camp.
No, and like I said, I can absolutely understand, especially at the beginning, because you're right. Anytime an author starts a story, they're probably working out some stuff that doesn't read quite as perfectly as others. For someone like me, who is so deeply steeped in high fantasy and epic mythology and all of that stuff, I drink this stuff up like water in the desert, so...
Hey, nicely done.
Well, this does lead quite nicely onto our next point, which is about pacing. How do we feel about the structure of the fic? So, Thorny, you were saying about the structure of this story. Does it... Well, considering what Cygnus has just said about the third paragraph being where it really starts to kick in, do you agree, or do you think that the structure of this fic is okay?
I don't know that I have too much to say about the structure of the fic. It does read very cinematically to me. We start out with the big wide shot of the wasteland and everything that's there. We kind of drift in around the pony. We drift closer. We learn a bit more about her and what she's doing there. It drifts into night, and when she changes her actions, then we go into her past, and we're brought back to the present. I think the only thing I would say is that maybe the first part during the day goes on a bit long, considering that the really important stuff happens at night. But you could make that change, and then I might change my mind and say, actually, no, I liked it better the other way. So, yeah, I quite feel the structure works.
Midori, what do you think?
I'm not really sure what else to add on to this point. I've said a lot of what I really have to say about the story already, and I'll admit I feel like everybody else has a much better way of interpreting their own words when talking about, well, generally anything. You all are a bunch of well-spoken, I don't even know, compliment.
Yeah,
Idiots.
well-spoken.
Idiots. A bunch
You're
of
not
well-spoken idiots is what we are.
The pacing...
I'm occasionally intelligent.
Yeah, we're idiots who are occasionally intelligent. We'll go with that.
Now speak for yourself.
I am.
Now
You
who's
didn't
being
know.
self-deprecating?
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Don't you dare judge me and the voices in my head.
I'm judging all of you.
Yeah, well, they say to fuck off.
I am judging every single voice in your head right now.
They all tell you all to fuck off.
You're all brilliant, so shut up.
For something as short as this story is, I felt like the pacing worked perfectly fine of the, I suppose, the transition from day into night and the shadows that come with it.
Luna, what do you think about the structure of this story for what it is, a mini-fic?
I think I said everything that I wanted to say when we were talking about the writing quality. That it was rushed in the beginning, but that it really found its feet toward the end.
Illya?
I think the the metaphors could have been stretched out a bit. It was nicely paced for the way they did it and well structured for the way they did it, but I think it could have been it could have been done a bit differently, a little bit more added to the metaphor. The descriptions of the metaphoric elements could have been extended a bit and would have pulled me into the story a little bit more. But no, I thought it was well structured. It was good.
Goombasa?
Not much to add on this front.
I think you said threat.
I like that as a new word. That is our new word of the
What is a
podcast.
I thought you
thrunt?
said threat.
Go on then, Goombasa. What is a thrunt?
It sounds very rude, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
You thrunt.
Oh my fucking god! That is a thing now. That is totally a thing now.
That's my own word, donut steal.
It's not copyrighted.
No, it doesn't have Cygnus's C next to it.
I don't have much to add on the front of the structure of the fic. I said most of what I wanted to say when we were discussing the writing. Pacing is good throughout. I will agree that it was sort of rushed in the beginning, but I did enjoy the beginning for its more mythic feel, like I said before. But yeah, I thought it was decently paced, especially considering how short it is. They do manage to cram a lot into just below 1,500 words, which is always impressive to me because I'm a verbose motherfucker.
Cygnus, what do you think?
As Luna and Thorny said, I don't really have anything to add on this point. I think I really got it out with the last thing that we talked about. But I'm curious. You're the one who raised this question. It sounds like you have something to add on this point.
I have nothing whatsoever to add. It's just a standard point that I put on every document.
Never mind then.
I wish I could claim some level of intelligence. My intelligent points stopped at the idea of a cipher. Okay, so... Oh, fuck, this one's bit by me as well. Oh, I've structured this really badly. Here's my point on structure. I've structured the doc craply. That is a word. Does the lack of... I can't spell either. Does the lack or dialogue? Does the lack of dialogue help or hinder the effect of the story? Help or hinder the effect the story is going for? Fuck's sake, I can't talk, so I'm going to pass that one across to you, Cygnus.
I would say so. I have always argued that there is a place for non-dialogue stories, especially ones of this length, especially ones of a more introspective nature that rely on this kind of subject material to get their points across. I don't think that dialogue would add anything to this story in any way, shape, or form.
Goombasa, you have something to add?
I don't see where you could add dialogue into this story. It seems to me like if you put any sort of dialogue into it, it would sort of ruin the effect that the fic is going for, which is a more mythic sort of storyteller-ish metaphor, and I just don't see it working with dialogue.
Illya, what do you think? Should there have been dialogue added, or do you think it works okay as it is?
It works beautifully as it is. I don't think it needs any. I mean, you could have added some, not very much though, so why any at all?
Luna?
I stand by my point from Dance that a fic doesn't have to have dialogue to be a fic. So I did try to imagine what this fic would be like if it had dialogue of any kind, even like in the flashback. It was 1,000 times worse when I tried to imagine that.
Why? Why do you think it was worse?
Because the story is both personal and... Because think of it this way. When you're alone by yourself, do you talk to the empty air, expecting a reply? I mean, I do, but that's because I'm responding out loud to things in my head.
I literally have just said I've got voices in my head, so...
I mean, I do, but by and large, if I'm alone in the house all day, I'm probably not going to speak a word. And most of what's going to happen, most of the exciting things in my life are going to happen inside my experience, inside my head, without me saying a word. And I feel as though, like, I was particularly trying to imagine dialogue in the flashback, like in the form of, say, a particular scene of her with her former lover, and it didn't work because because this fic works very well as it is, and for the mood it's trying to give. And I think that in order to add dialogue to it, you would have to completely change the tone or the pacing or the way that it what's the word?
The structure, perchance?
Not the structure, the
The flow?
You'd have to interrupt the flow or change it or change the feeling that you get from reading it.
Midori, what do you think?
I think that the lack of dialogue is very it can always be done very beautifully, and considering that this is such a short story with a single character, it just doesn't work with dialogue in it. It's a lot better being left to her thoughts with what is presented in the story. Like there's nobody for her to talk to. It doesn't make any sense anyways.
And Thornquill, what do you think?
I'm pretty much in agreement. I am amused because back when we reviewed Dance, I was the one who was like, oh, it's so unusual to see a story without dialogue. And then it's like, Cygnus goes and writes one. And then I remember, oh, hey, I've known about this one forever. And I'm like, oh, yeah, maybe it's not actually all that uncommon. And that comment wasn't really that clever. But it just goes to show you continually learn. But at any rate, I think the only thing I would add is the reason I think dialogue would hinder this story is that Luna pointed out that really the only place you could even try would be to write the flashbacks and have a conversation between her and her lover. And the only thing I could see you getting out of that would be you could give him a bit more characterization. But I think that would actually hurt because her lover is a very romanticized trope of a character. He is, he's the poet who would go off in a cabin in the woods by himself and say fuck the world and I'm just going to do my own brilliant thing. And everyone has kind of their idea of how a person like that would act, and to an extent a lot of us admire ideas of people like that, like Cygnus is typing in Thoreau
Or Veta.
Yeah. But if you actually try to write their dialogue, then it's the author's idea of what that character is, and it takes away the reader's invitation to fill in a bit of that blank themselves. And you'd make that character more unpleasant because those kind of characters actually are unpleasant. This leaves in both that invitation to the reader and a bit more of the romance.
Cygnus, do you have something to add?
Just a hypothetical. It wouldn't be this story, and this story, as I think we've all agreed, would not be served by dialogue. But another take on this story, which I think would be interesting, would be a purely dialogue one, where someone's going out to the desert to have their little soliloquy and shout to the heavens, "Why did you leave me?" Again, not necessarily something that would work for in this context necessarily with what this author was going for, but something to think about.
Oh man, my head is actually spinning just thinking of the challenge of actually pulling that off. Oh, it's actually hurting me inside, and I need to stop. Like, no, you're right. It could absolutely be done, but oh my god, I don't even want to think about trying to do it.
I'm an enabler when it comes to writing. I'm so sorry.
Illya, you have something to say?
Yeah, I just want to add one thing. I think this story really needs not dialogue. I think it needs music. I might actually read this one just so I could put some music with it, because that's what it's a musical poem, and it speaks to me in musical terms. And so I'd like to hear some music in it.
Please share the result when you do.
Yeah.
Might do it.
If it's out before this podcast goes out, then I will link it in the description.
A challenge.
Okay, our next point is one by Cygnus. This is ultimately a story about death, but whose? His in the physical sense or hers in the metaphorical? Cygnus?
Well, the reason I asked the question is because I don't really have much of an answer. I would argue both, but I would like to hear everyone else's responses before I weigh in.
Okay then. So, Goombasa, what do you think?
I never do good with this kind of topic. I'm not really sure how best to answer it. It's a cop-out answer, but this is this is a question that I think everybody's going to have a different interpretation of. And I think I do think it kind of works both ways, especially after reading it a couple of times. because you can see that she's still pining for him, which I guess is I guess it's a kind of death, but yeah, as you can tell, I'm not good at answering these kinds of questions.
Illya, what do you think?
His is death. I'm not sure hers is, even metaphorically. I mean, yes, she dies in a sense, but I feel like the story is about her rebirth rather than her death.
In what sense?
I believe this is a transitional phase for her. She's going out to the desert to find something she's not certain of, and when she finds it, she will be reborn in that aspect of life.
Okay.
No
Luna.
dialogue, like you said.
Sorry, I interrupted you there.
That's okay. I was just going to say no dialogue, and as he said, you write your own feelings and thoughts into it because there isn't any, and that's what I'm writing in, that she's coming back as something else.
Okay. Luna, what do you think?
I'm leaning more toward the mares, Fiddlesticks, just because what Illya said was beautiful, but I would argue that it's less about rebirth than it is about death, because if you think of it as a cycle, then death is the precursor, the prelude, if you want to go musical, to rebirth. And the story doesn't end on her having a rebirth. The story ends on her taking her time to appreciate the fact that she does still need to grieve. So I think before she can return to her life as it was, or return to the world of living per se, and begin anew. And I'm sorry about the background noise.
You're fine. Or Bavaria, I'm dying again. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that, Luna? Or
I'm good. I think that's about. Again, I think that this is more of a story about grief. And I had a chat with Sickness about this. I cheated a little bit, but I think that this is a story about death and grief, but that it leans more toward grief, and that it leans more toward having metaphorical death in the sense that you have to have a period of mourning and unhappiness and barrenness in terms of the metaphor of the desert, and darkness in terms of the metaphor of the shadows before you can come back into the light, have water again.
Interesting. Midori, what do you think?
I agree that the only real death in this story is that of Fiddlesticks' lover. Fiddlesticks herself is just grieving, and she needs to grieve in her own way. So that's essentially what the story is her going out to grieve in the most poetic way that she feels that she can, so that she can connect the most with her lost lover in her own way before she moves on.
And Thornquill?
It's definitely an interesting point. I think honestly the story leaves room for all of these interpretations to have merit, that's for sure. For me, Fiddlesticks' ending doesn't feel so much, or rather, it doesn't feel so much that she is dead as a character, so much as she is very deeply scarred. And I think cynicism has a lot to do with that death in a way, because this story very repeatedly says that when they were lovers, they both were extremely cynical artistic types. And cynicism is death to an extent. Cynicism has repeatedly been called a dead end in terms of intellectual thinking. And that is where it carried her lover. So she knows, in a sense, that that ending was inevitable for someone who was as purely that ideal as he was. And so, in a way, she still carries that death with her, because she hasn't changed her ways or her way of thinking. And I definitely get the sense she intends to continue on in that way as well. I think this is very much interpretation, but I did get the sense that she has done this ritual before, mainly from at the beginning of the stories where it says she did not wander, wanderers were aimless, meandering, and she strode with purpose in the realm of the dead. She knows exactly where she's going, and she doesn't react with surprise when she encounters what she finds. So I kind of feel like she has done this before. She has gone to see him before. And even though she is carrying on her life in a slightly different way, and so she's not dead, she is going to keep carrying this with her too. I don't know. I think I just interpret it slightly differently is all.
Okay. Well, our next point builds on that one, and it was written by Luna. Building on Cygnus's points about death, do we think the metaphor of the wasteland and the shadows is effective? So, Luna?
I came up with this point mainly, again, because I was having a chat with Cygnus a little bit about it, but I wanted to see what everybody else thought mainly, because I do think that the metaphor is effective, but I wanted to see what everybody, first of all, what everyone else thought about it, and second, if we saw it the same, if they saw it the same way I did, or if they saw it in a different way. I know that Thorny saw the shadows as being literal, and I think, Midori, you said that you saw the entire wasteland as possibly not being real.
Okay, Illya, you want to explain that one?
Well, the moon doesn't shine there. Explain that. The sun shines there, but the moon doesn't shine there. I don't believe there's a place in Equestria where one shines and the other doesn't. So in her desert with no moon, it seems to me that it might be metaphorical.
Gohan blew it up so that Goku would turn back from Uzara. Shout out to anybody who gets that reference.
I do, just why?
Why? Because I was on a Dragon Ball kick, that's why. And because I've got nothing of any intelligence to add to this conversation, so, you know,
That's
it was that or a
bullshit,
fart
you know
joke.
it.
Anime is intelligent.
A fart blew up the moon.
See, that's the joke I could have made. It's a good job I've got Midori here
Oh
to
my
make
God.
it for me. Okay, then. So, leading on from this bit more, is do we think the metaphor of the wasteland is effective based on? Oh no, then we're on the wrong one. No, I'm on the right one.
Yeah, we're still on. We're still on.
Yeah, I've preempted myself by crossing it out. Thornquill, what do you think about this?
It's definitely, I had not thought to think about it in those terms for certain. When I read that the moon didn't shine there, I know that a lot of people have played with the idea that Equestria isn't necessarily a sphere, that it might... Flat Equestria theory, not touching that fucking can of worms. But I mean, you know, it could be like a disc world, or it could be flat, and Celestia and Luna controlling the spheres could mean something entirely different than a traditional orbit. So I read that, and I read it as this was an Equestria that was not a sphere, and that if you go out far enough into whatever lies beyond the ring of the world, and you go to where there's just nothing, that the moon is literally too far away. That's what the fic says, is that it was too far and she was too far. So literally she's gone far enough away to where you can't even see the moon anymore. It's either too small or it's hidden by something. But honestly, you could probably read that as being a signifier that this is happening either mentally or in some other plane than the literal. Luna is correct. I did read this story very literally. I honestly read it as a bit of a ghost story. So my interpretation is probably very different from those who read what's happening more metaphorically.
Well, no, I just can't stop thinking about Equestria being on top of 4 elephants on top of a giant bull, so thank you for that.
I mean, it would fit.
It would, especially since we've had multiple stories with the death of ponies being a thing.
We like killing people.
Well, I meant literally the death, like Discworld's death, and the death of ponies. And Goombasa knows what I'm talking about. And so does Illya.
I now
Yes.
desire the death from
Yeah.
Discworld to be a pony character.
Read Mort Takes a Holiday, because he is in that. Would anybody else like to chime in on this point? Because I am conscious of the time. So rather than going through it everybody individually, would anybody like to contribute to this point?
Yeah, I think I can add a little bit. I actually hadn't come up with either the Illya or the Thorny interpretations for this. I like them both. I think they both add a lot to the story and say a lot about its versatility, and the fact that not to make the character a cipher, but the story is very much a cipher in terms of what you take away from it. And I think Illya, you said that as well. I guess just I'll throw my interpretation here on the pile. Every journey has both a physical and a metaphorical component. And whichever variation of that you choose to take away from this, I think that there is a certain amount of this that you have to ascribe to her doing mentally. whether that's even so far as making the music in her head rather than necessarily playing it on the fiddle, or whether seeing the character, her lover at the end, is metaphorical or physical. She has to come to a point on her own terms, mentally, emotionally, whereby she is ready to call the journey completed. And that was actually kind of the point that I wanted to make with regards to the death. And I think Illya captured that best. You can't be reborn without dying first, without calling one journey completed and being willing to start the next. And I think I've railed on long enough.
Would anybody like to follow that up?
I think there's just one kind of question to maybe delve a little bit deeper. So with my interpretation, with everything that is in the story, everything the story says happens, and it's all real to at least some extent, as real as ghosts can be. If that's what the story is, then that leans into my interpretation that she is there to hold on to the past, and she is there to be with his ghosts so that she doesn't have to completely let go of her lover. And in that interpretation, all that him appearing at the end, basically as a shadow of Cygnus.
I was wondering when that was going to come up.
You know, black was his mane, black was his coat, and his eyes shone like pearls. I'm sorry, Cygnus, it's you.
Cygnus.
I don't know. I thought maybe his coat. No, he was just reborn as an edgelord. Clearly.
What?
Did you just call Cygnus
No,
an
I was
edgelord,
referring
Lena?
to the lover.
We are going to have a talk
Oh
later.
my
Missy.
goodness.
Oh my! Oh my goodness!
No, I said that the
But,
lover was
okay.
reborn as an edgelord in the shadows.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. But yeah, so him appearing in that form in the literal interpretation of the story doesn't really mean too much more other than that obviously he's a ghost. But I was curious if it is metaphor or if the author is simply as talented, as brilliant as we all know them to be. Or as I think them to be. What does that imagery mean if it's not just, well, he's a ghost? What does it mean that he appears at the end as a shadow pony with eyes like pearls? Did that mean anything deeper to, or signify anything specific to you, Illya? I'm just curious.
It's a little bit difficult to tell, actually. I mean, I recall when I was reading the bit, and it came to the point where the stallion was there and his eyes were shining. I was suddenly struck with a sense of optimism, like, a turning point. I've had quite a few losses, to death and other things in my life, and gotten over them in various ways. And each time something is lost, a little more is gained. So looking at it and seeing that there was something very real growing in the pony, in a metaphorical sense, where she would see this stallion with his bright eyes shining. There was something for her to move towards. I don't think it was something holding her back. I think it was something pulling her forward. And I found the point to be very optimistic, and I enjoyed that.
I tend to agree. I don't really want to go into this because this really isn't the forum for it. But as Illya says, we all have lost people. We all will lose people. And one of the things that you'll hear, and hopefully not get to experience, but especially in situations like this, you don't really get the opportunity to say goodbye. And no. And my reading of this was definitely her trying to go out there and put a period on their relationship. Just, you left me. This is how it ends. I got the chance to say goodbye to you on my own terms. And that's that. But again, down to interpretation.
Again, I don't see the whole, I don't see that she's clinging, because one of the very last sentences is, she would turn back when the sun rose, and she would walk back towards civilization and the light. but that would come later. For now, it was shadows she wanted. So, yes, she's maybe clinging to her grief for a bit, but she knows that eventually she's going to go back.
Exactly.
All right, then.
Okay. The twinned portrayals of cynicism are beautiful. One leading to suicide, the other ultimately to a life on one's own terms. Which is the more compelling argument? So, Cygnus, you want to explain this one?
Explain the question or explain my feelings on it?
Your feelings on it.
Well, again, I'm going to kind of defer on that point because I want to hear everyone else's first and not colour the room.
Okay. We could colour the room in darkness, according
You
to
are
this.
darker than black.
Stop.
Luna, what do you think of this?
I honestly wouldn't even have noticed that that was a point to be made until I saw that in the doc. So it's not really one I have a lot of to say about. I don't know that there's much in the story that compels one toward the path of the poet, because the poet is an idealized version of himself in her memory. And he's also, as Thornquill said, he's a sort of a distilled ideal of the tortured romantic whose life must inevitably end because their misery has consumed them. And that because their cynicism has led to the literal, or the metaphorical and literal dead end. Whereas her journey and the way that it's written and everything about the story seems to suggest that hers, at least for her, is the more compelling choice, that she was not entirely swallowed up in the cynicism and is still able to see a spark of light, even though there's no moon in her even though there's no moon right now in her barren desert, there will be later. And she's still, and the entire story seems to be about specifically going to that dark place to allow yourself the comfort of grieving before you, but with the intention and with the knowledge that the sun will rise again and the moon will rise again, and that you will once again rejoin the land of the living.
Okay, Goombasa, what do you think about this?
Well, this question really just makes me want to play Silent Hill again. Because that's one of the major themes of it, is seeing the way that the main character interprets the way that the town is torturing him, and depending on your actions, he comes out of it a better person, or he can end up just committing suicide.
Yeah, I was admiring your point because I love seeing sort of cross-medium ideas.
In this story, though, I do like to... I do more often like to take the more optimistic interpretation of the story, that this is her way of letting go and sort of moving on with her life, letting go of the past, still knowing that it's going to stay with her, because that sort of thing never really truly goes away, but finding the strength to carry on and not let herself run into that same brick wall that her lover did.
Illya, what do you think?
Well, what were we on? Oh, the twin portrayals of cynicism. What we were able to see was the pony falling into the water, and his eyes were open as he fell, and as he drowned, she could look into his eyes. She was actually seeing him on the other side. She was seeing in him a sort of life after death, perhaps not for him, but for her. And when she went into the desert and she looked into the pony's eyes, there was the life again. There was the life that she would be leading, with his dark shadow always with her. I thought it was a wonderful portrayal, and that's why I read it twice. I just thought that was a beautiful metaphor.
Midori, what do you think?
I think I don't really fully understand the ideal of I understand what the question of the point is bringing up and everything, but I view my life in a very cynical manner, and despite that, I'm an optimist. So I don't really know how to answer this point in any way that adds to the point.
Thorny?
Yeah, I'm curious to hear more from Cygnus on where this line of thinking was leading him. I do agree that it is beautiful because we know these kind of characters. We know the romanticized artists who don't do what they do for commercial success. They do it because they see deeper truth in the world and all that stuff. Sometimes it's true, sometimes it's pretension. And it doesn't really matter in this story. I do think it's interesting just because cynicism, I think, well, because we know this story was so heavily influenced by T.S. Eliot, and there's probably a lot of cynicism coming through in that. But we do view this story kind of with a more modern take, just because I'm sorry, for me, it feeds into the debate that's going on right now between postmodernism and what comes next. Do we keep looking at the world just as, oh, well, everything is broken, everything is broken down and bunk, and that's the end of it, and we're smart for recognizing that, versus newer ideas saying, well, we can recognize that and then work to fix it, sometimes called new sincerity. This feeds into a lot of dialogue with people like David Foster Wallace and all of that sort of thing. And I do tend to agree. I think that cynicism is in and of itself a dead end. And that is kind of reflected in these two characters because one ends up dying. And in my interpretation, she's not there to move on. I think she is there to hang on. And I think somehow, I think his eyes are partly what make me think that. I think he's an attractive character to her in his ghost form. His eyes shone like pearls. That's beautiful. That's not creepy or something that you want to leave behind. His eyes shone like pearls is also a phrase that shows up in, not verbatim, but it is in T.S. Eliot's poem, The Wasteland. So that is an image that the author has taken and you cast in their own light here to say something completely different. But yeah, so to me, I think it is beautiful, but it's also I'm not sure exactly what I'm trying to say. Cygnus, be more brilliant, please.
Happy to oblige. A couple of things. Number one, Goombasa. Harry Mason or James Sunderland?
James Sunderland.
There we go. Totally hear you on that point with regards to Silent Hill. We could go on for hours about that point and probably should. Thorny, with regards to the pearls, I understand what you're saying there, and again, not going to try and shit on your interpretation as writ large throughout the story, but the other thing to bear in mind with pearls is that they're not alive. They may be beautiful, but they are dead, and they are a remnant of something that was alive. They're bones, effectively. With regards to cynicism in the greater context, I do very much like, and I'm very glad that you brought up new sincerity as a part of this. I tend to be of the opinion that a certain amount of cynicism is healthy. It's just a matter of what you choose to do with it. And I don't know, that may simply be what I was bringing to the table, but that was definitely something that I read into the portrayals here. Again, something that very much comes up when you're reading Eliot and a lot of the other interbellum and post-World War II literature. You know, the world is shit. Things are as bad as they have ever been. What are we going to do about it? Are we just going to elect to kill ourselves and make the process that much easier, take the pain away? Or are we actually going to do something constructive about it, find, even though it may be difficult, the beautiful things in this life and move on from the pain? So it was very interesting to hear all of your reactions to this. To my mind, I do still believe that the more compelling argument is the one whereby you take the pain and the experience in stride, make that part of your experience, and move on. But yeah, again, I ramble.
I mean, I think we honestly agree pretty closely on our interpretations of what cynicism is and where it can lead. I think our just different interpretations are, what does Fiddlesticks end up doing? Does she continue to embrace cynicism and come back to this ghost year after year and eventually die in her cabin in the woods, or is she there to heal and then move on? And I don't think either of those interpretations actually change the deeper discussion about where this more cynical approach can lead.
How much of the cynicism was hers? I mean, when the story started, when the tale of her life started, I didn't see a lot of cynicism until she met this fellow, and she learned it from him, and she embraced it greatly. And so now that cynicism is a part of her life as she moves on, but it's not debilitating to the point where she will drown herself eventually. It's just hers now, and she'll do with it what she will.
It's kind of like a weight that she is going to keep carrying with her, but it won't dominate her like it did him, is kind of what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah, it's not a heavy weight, just a weight.
I like that. I like that a lot.
So, final thoughts then. I'll end with Thornquill. I'll start with Cygnus and work my way down the list on this. What are our final thoughts about this story then? Cygnus?
Absolutely gorgeous story. Obviously very thought-provoking given what we've all talked about here. Definitely worth a read if you like something introspective, and frankly, I wish we would see more of it.
Goombasa?
This is one of the rare times where my opinion of a fic changing after a discussion on it, because after a second reading and after having this discussion, I like this fic a lot more than when I first read it for this discussion. I thought it was really well written. It's beautifully written. And I think it is worth it to read no matter who you are, especially if you're looking for something short. But I recommend reading it more than once. I don't think it holds up well on a first reading, but once you go back and read it again, that is when you really start to see a lot more of the magic in this story.
Illya?
I'm with Goombasa on that. The first time I read it, I found it a bit boring. The second time, much better, and the third time, just absolutely beautiful. So much so that I would have liked to have seen some of the metaphors fleshed out a bit more. I thought it was a wonderful story.
Luna?
It's definitely a book club fic. I agree with everybody before me. Also, if you like Joy Division, read this fic.
Midori?
I thought that it was a very good story. I still feel like it wasn't quite my cup of tea per se, but it still was a very beautiful story all the same.
Bless you, Goombasa.
Oh, thank you. I forgot
And
we're in the
Thornquill.
same room.
She's sneezing in the background of Midori.
That's what happens when we're in the same room.
Aww. And Thornquill. Final thoughts.
I mean, you probably already know my final thoughts. It absolutely has my seal of approval. I don't just like this story, I flat out admire it. Yeah. It is gorgeous, and I'm really pleased that others enjoyed it too.
As for my final thoughts, you may have noticed I've been quite quiet throughout this reading. That's because I could admire it based on everybody else's discussion. I remain at the end bored to tears, same as I started, so I haven't had much to add to this discussion. Like Midori, it's just not my cup of tea.
Wait, that was your interpretation of being quiet? I thought you were quite talkative during this discussion.
I was quiet about the fic itself. You may have noticed that the majority of my dialogue in this has been me either telling people to fuck off or making stupid jokes.
Slice of wife.
Verbally shitposting.
Yes. Right, okay. So we'll go on to the fic picking. So, those who are eligible for... I forgot the word then. Those who are eligible this time are Cygnus, Goombasa, Illya, Luna, and Midori, since I chose last time and Thornquill chose this time.
I'm curious to see if it will continue to go in the same order that it did the first time around for you guys.
I know, right? I can't remember who went after I did last time.
The fic picker is Illya.
Breaking the cycle.
Oh, my.
So, Illya, what fic are we going to look at next time?
A very short story that I just recorded, actually, called I Alone by Razgriz, and he's got 3 numbers, and I can't recall the 3 numbers. But if you look up I Alone, you'll find it under Razgriz. I'm picking the story as much for what it says as how it says it.
Okay. So we will be looking next time at I Alone. And now it's time for us to say our goodbyes. So we have been Them's Writing Words. Say goodbye, Cygnus.
Goodbye. Final thought. This is very heavily based on T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. I've done a reading of that on my channel. If you would like to understand a little bit more about that particular aspect
link
of this.
in the description. Say goodbye, Goombasa.
Goodbye, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Say goodbye, Illya.
Good night, everyone.
Say goodbye, Luna.
Have a lovely evening, my friends.
Goodbye from Midori.
Good night, Sally.
And finally, goodbye from our fic picker, Thornquill.
Turn back from our shadows and return to civilization and the light. And we will see you next time.
Join us next time for our monthly dose of ponies and penis jokes. Bye, everybody.
Lovely note to end on.
Be lovely to each other. Bye.
Bye.
Hey,
Yeah, had to ruin my poetic outro. Why?
That's why I said it.
We actually did not make a single dick joke in this entire podcast today.
Yeah, I was going to.
It's because we had
say we
time
were all
limit.
quite well behaved this time around.
We weren't that well behaved. We weren't that well behaved. There was the slice of wife thing.
Okay, that was because I was eating a cookie and it was way too...
But yeah, but it was amazing.
To be fair,
I also knew
avoided
words.
several instances that I could have butted in with my own shit posting and dragging out certain things, simply because I knew that we had time constraints and I wanted to make sure that we got everything done in time.
Well, we did. We did. So now you can
Which
say whatever
I
shit post you
appreciate.
want to say, Midori, before we end.
Goof dildo.
God damn it.
There we go. Our penis joke.
As a final thought, Goombasa, Thrunt would make an interesting shibboleth for Thunder Cunt.
Oh my god, you're right.
Oh my god!
Yeah.
What the fuck is a thunder cunt?
You've never watched Blade 3, have you?
I have.
I feel like
I don't
the words
remember that.
speak for
Thrunt is
themselves.
now my name for anybody who interrupts the podcast with dick jokes.
Yeah.
Front.
Well said.
Silence,
Be
Thrunt.
gone, Thrunt.
Oh my god.
Given the frequency of the making of the dick jokes, does that make Scribbler the queen
Yes.
Thrunt?
Yes. Yes. I
And now
claim
we
this
have that
title.
on recording too.
I
It's
am
a
Queen
contraction
Thrunt.
of thou runt.
Yes. In polite
cunt.
company.
Well, that means Goombasa
Oh,
has to be
God.
labeled Queen Bitch, and Scribbler is now Queen Thrunt, obviously. That works.
I can be Empress Thrunt.
I like Empresses more than
Yes.
queens.
Oh yeah. I'm Empress Thrunt, and Goombasa is still Queen Bitch.
Yes.
And I'm Princess Kitty Glitter.
Right, that seems a pretty good note to end on, to be honest.
Goodbye.
See you, Cygnus.
Bye.
Take
Bye,
care, Cygnus.
Cygnus.
Beautiful
Nothing.
time.
Bye.